We're going to have Angela Legg speak to us. She's from MDA USA, who's an organization that has its roots back in the 1950s when Paul Cohen, a prominent New York business leader living with muscular dystrophy, invited a group of individuals to meet in his New York office. Each had a personal connection to muscular dystrophy, and the gathering focused on the urgent need to raise funds to advance research seeking treatments and cures for muscular dystrophy. Angela, if you can tell us what happened in the last 70 years.
Oh, that's a tall order. Let me just get my settings on right. That's okay? Can you see the
yes, that's perfect.
presenter view?
Yes, it's perfect.
Well, last 70 years. I've only joined the MDA for just over 1 year, and I have a similar story. Actually, I met my husband online also, and he has a form of limb-girdle muscular dystrophy. But I have to say, our story isn't as inspirational or maybe not as romantic as the previous couple. But he does have a TEDx talk, which I can about his diagnostic journey. Which I can post the link later in the chat. So yeah, so my background, I have trained in academia, and I've been a scientist for over a decade. I've worked on many different forms of muscular dystrophies, and about a year ago, I decided that I could make more of an impact by being part of the research team at MDA USA, where I'm now the Vice President of Research. A second. Oh. So MDA USA is the biggest umbrella organization that covers neuromuscular diseases in the US. As has been said, we've been around for 70 years, and our mission is to empower the people, our patients and their families, to live longer and more independent lives. And we achieve this goal by supporting research, advancing care, as well as advocacy for patients and their families. So this is a really brief history of where we came from and where we are now. From humble beginnings in the 1950s, MDA have steadily raised funds over the next 70 years, totaling over $2 billion. And this has helped contribute towards some really important milestones in neuromuscular disease research. We've funded over 2,000 clinicians, as well as scientists with grants and with fellowships, not just in the USA, but internationally. And now in 2022, the field has 18 FDA-approved drugs for neuromuscular diseases, many of which can be credited to MDA for providing seed funds or clinical trial support. And in addition to research, we also support care centers, and we have from that a patient clinical database called MOVER, which I'll expand upon later in my talk. So as an umbrella organization, we support over 43 different neuromuscular diseases and even more subtypes within these 43 categories of neuromuscular diseases. These include your myopathies, ion channel diseases, neuropathies, even ALS. So not many MDAs around the world support ALS, but MDA USA does have ALS in its umbrella, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. We have a lot in our portfolio, as you can imagine, many diseases, and sometimes it's very challenging for us to stay on top of all the needs and the advancements for each one of these diseases. So at MDA, our strategy is to integrate research and clinical resources to help achieve our overall mission. And we have different departments within our organization that's responsible for our care center networks, who work really closely with our MOVER team database to collect patient clinical data. We have our research team who's responsible for interfacing with the clinicians and the scientists, awarding them grants as well as managing them. We have healthcare partnerships, who interface with industry partners to help them plan clinical trials and connect them with the patient community. We also have a professional education department who interface with our patient community and to provide them with up-to-date information, as well as keeping our clinicians up to date with the latest information. And we have our conference team who put together conferences, annual big conferences, but also little satellite meetings around the year. And together we all synergize to achieve our overall mission. So today, I'll mainly be speaking about the innovations in science team and what we do. Our chief research officer is Sharon Hesterly. Many of you may know her. She has an industry background. This is me. I'm the vice president of research, and I look after the day-to-day operations of the research team, managing the portfolio directors of our muscle diseases and our neuro diseases and our grant managers. As I mentioned, we have the conference organizing team and the mover patient database team, which we also work really closely with. So the focus of our innovations in science team is to accelerate therapies via strategic focus areas that we enable with our various programs. And these programs are to help understand the cause of disease, developing testing therapy, screening and diagnosis, clinical trial readiness, clinical trials themselves, scientific community engagement, and to ensure that there is a continuous pipeline of young scientists for the next generation. So our activities have had a lot of impact in the field of neuromuscular disease research. We provide the single greatest source of funding to the field in the USA, second only to the federal government. So over the years, we founded thousands of investigators with grants as well as fellowships. We also have a venture philanthropy arm that invests in promising early stage drug or device companies to give them the boost that they need to then apply for bigger venture investment. We have directly contributed funding to research and started research that has led to 7 approved drugs in the field. So I hope I've convinced you that MDA has indeed led the way in supporting the growth of the neuromuscular disease field. So we are indeed entering a really exciting era of neuromuscular diseases. So for many decades, as you know, there have been no approved therapies for neuromuscular diseases. But over the past few years now, our investments has started to bear fruit, and we're starting to see a steady increase in drugs being approved for ALS, for SMA, for DMD, and this will just accelerate, I feel, over time. So this is really great news for patients all over the world with neuromuscular diseases. So as you know, the drug development process or pipeline is a really long, multi-year process spanning many years. Typically begins in an academic setting, where basic research into disease mechanism and genetic cause is conducted, and then moving on to potentially identifying therapeutic molecules and proof of concept testing, followed by translational research, which typically happens outside the academic setting before finally, clinical trials and approval to test in the humans. So at MDA, we provide support to de-risk drug development at every stage, and below is a list of all the different programs offering various to de-risk each stage of the drug development process. And depending on your where you are in the drug development pipeline, you would apply for a different program that we cover. This slide here shows examples of some of this de-risking support that we've offered. So in the form of research grants, this year we offered 32. So as I mentioned, this is typically covers basic science research such as mobilizing muscle stem cells to treat DMD. We offered 13 trainee grants to develop the careers of young scientists, clinical trial grants, clinical network grants to establish shared resources to conduct multi-site trials across the United States, infrastructure grants, idea awards, which is our newest grant category. This is for kind of high risk, high reward ideas, venture philanthropy, which is our where we fund promising startup investments, our mover registry, which collects patient data at our MDA care sites, and of course our conferences and the workshops. So those are some examples of programs that we have. So, and we believe our strategy works because we see that our investments and support over the years are resulting in approved drugs. So for example, MDA launched a telethon in the 1950s, and they invested heavily in identifying the genetic cause underlying Duchenne muscular dystrophy by providing a grant to Luke Kunkel, who is my postdoctoral mentor. And then Luke Kunkel discovered in 1986 that the gene underlying DMD is, dystrophin. And since then, this has really opened the way to a lot of drug discovery in the field, beginning with treatment with, steroids, as well as gene therapy with the microdystrophins and exon skipping drugs. And all this started because we identified dystrophin as the underlying gene. But you can see that over the years, we have steadily provided support to result in drug development for DMD. Similarly for ALS, MDA's investment in the early basic science to Bob Brown, and finding the underlying genetic mutations in SOD1 and development of animal models, as well as understanding the disease mechanism, has led to the approval of several drugs, such as Rilotec, Radicava, and we're also supporting the platform trials for multiple drug testing at the ALS Healy Center, which we believe will lead to the identification of more efficacious drugs in the years to come for ALS. So here's a list of the funding opportunities we offer, and they're targeted to different stages of research. As I mentioned, if you're seeking funds to support your work, please take the time to visit our website and read about which is applicable to your needs. So this year we awarded over 17 million in new grants, with the following amounts spread across different categories. This graph tracks a number of grants awarded in the last 5 years. As you can see, we were hit really hard during the pandemic years, 2020, 2021, and we could not fundraise for research, and we were just supporting our existing grants, and we couldn't afford to give out any new grants. Many staff had to be laid off during this period. It was a tough time for MDA USA, as I'm sure is the case all around the world with other nonprofits. But now in 2022, as you can see, we are beginning to bounce back because in-person fundraising events can now take place again, and we are beginning to award a lot more grants again. So that's great. And for those of you interested, here's a breakdown by disease of the awards that we funded this year. The highest was DMD. In previous years, it's been ALS, but this year ALS was tied with CMT. And it's also nice to see the other categories of diseases also being covered and getting funding for projects and fellowships and so on. So one of our biggest focus areas in investment is gene therapies. So gene therapy, gene replacement therapy in particular, with AAV delivery has shown a lot of potential to treat many neuromuscular diseases over the years. And we have invested in several of these, although only one is approved so far, which is Zolgensma for SMA. But there is DMD with microdystrophin gene therapy on the horizon, which is looking very promising. And trials are underway for also limb-girdles, Pompe, and X-linked myotubular myopathy. This field, I would say, is gaining a lot of traction, not just in academia, but also in industry. It's a multi-million-dollar industry now. So while we recognize the potential of gene therapy, we also want to be at the forefront and lead the way in addressing some of the challenges associated with AAV gene therapy, particularly as it relates to the safety issues. So earlier this year, we held a summit and invited key stakeholders in the gene therapy field to openly discuss some of the safety challenges and ideas, proposed ideas on how to de-risk the technology to make it as safe as possible for patients, because there's been quite a few adverse events and even deaths. Two outcomes of this meeting were we issued a RFA, a request for applications, on grants to investigate why some patients respond badly to microdystrophin gene therapy and experience life-threatening side effects due to a bad reaction to the dystrophin transgene. And another outcome was to publish a meeting report, which is currently in peer review. So another way we are investing in gene therapy is to make sure that ultra-rare diseases do not get left behind. There are ultra-rare forms of neuromuscular diseases that can be solved by gene replacement therapy, but they can't gain traction or funding support because of their rare nature. It just doesn't make for an attractive commercial investment. So this year we are launching a new program called Kickstart, which is an in-house incubator for a selected ultra-rare neuromuscular disease, in which we are working really closely with an investigator to advance their proof of concept studies out of the lab and then into the clinic. And if we can demonstrate success and sustainability of this project, then it will allow us to pursue more ultra-rare diseases in the years to come. So one of the goals of the Kickstart program is to establish a roadmap for drug development for ultra-rare diseases. We identified that some of the investigators that applied, have no resources or know how to take their discoveries to the next step towards translation. So that is what our Kickstart program is aimed towards. It's to work with the investigator, consultants, contract research organizations in order to assemble an FDA-ready pre-IND package. We do not have the funds currently to take the project all the way into the GMP manufacturing stage and into the clinic. So the aim is to synergize with the NIH, who have programs and the resources to do that. Okay, so now I want to move on to our care center networks. As I mentioned earlier, MDA has established numerous care center sites around the US for patients, offering a team of physicians, nurses, and other healthcare professionals. There are 150 sites that see over 60,000 patients a year. Patients seen at these care center clinics have the option to participate in our MOVER database. Stands for MDA's Neuromuscular Observational Research Data Hub. So with this patient data collection, MDA aims to address the significant data shortage in the neuromuscular disease space that is the bottleneck for a lot of drug development companies and also for clinical trials. So far we have over 4,000 patients enrolled at over 60 sites. And this data has been used by both academia as well as industry, and people can apply to use these. So MOVER currently captures data across 7 indications, but we have plans to grow this into to more diseases. And the data collected at each site is structured So it's at every site, the same data is collected so that they can be compared using case report forms that track the longitudinal progression of each patient's disease at each visit. This is the data that's collected. So an example use of our MOVA data set is that we can track the adoption of FDA-approved therapies as an example. So for DMD, there are now 4 exon skipping drugs approved. What our data tells us is that all the patients who are candidates, of all the patients who are candidates, only 38% have opted to use these drugs. And we're trying to right now understand why that is the case, perhaps due to limitations in healthcare coverage. For SMA, there are 3 approved therapies: Spinraza, Zolgensma, Evrysdi. And we have statistics on who are on these drugs, when they start them, and various other statistics associated with these patients that can be monitored over time. Similarly, for ALS, there are 5 approved therapies. Our MOVA database keeps statistics on patient use of these drugs, and we can ask really specific questions to help plan for future clinical trials with these patients, and who are on how many drugs, and how long have they been on them, and are they making a difference, and things like that. So I want to end off my last 2 slides by talking about our upcoming annual conference. So this year marked our first return to in-person scientific conference and clinical. It's not all scientific. We've got topics that are targeted to allied health professionals, nonprofits, investors, as well as researchers and physicians. It was highly successful this year. We had a hybrid conference, in-person attendance, as well as virtual. And next year, I would like to invite everyone to attend the one, it's in mid-March in Dallas, Texas. And this is just an example of some of the sessions I've highlighted that may be of interest, but there is a lot more, and the agenda is actually out and you can access that on the website. Poster and abstract submissions are due before December the 13th, but if you don't want to submit a poster, that's okay too. Please come. There'll be something for everyone there, and it's a really good networking opportunity, and to see the scope of the work that we do. It's not just targeted to US people, but internationally. So with that, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak, and if you have any questions, you can ask me, or you can feel free to email me.
Thank you, Angela. There's a question in the comment section. What do you think about Givinostat for DMD?
I don't know yet what the results look like. I have to ask the clinical trial people, but we don't yet have statistics on Givinostat on the DMD patients in the MOVA database. So I'll have to ask the company that's and the investigators who are doing the trials. But yeah, I'm not too sure. So I'm sorry.
Thank you. If there are any other questions, you can feel free to ask them.
Yeah. And I want to say also that this year, actually, we awarded more international grants than we did for the US. So it's not, even though we're MDA USA, lots of our applicants come from all over the world. And, this year, actually, only 34% of the grants that we awarded came from the US. The rest were from international.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I know you and your husband very well for a while, and we have been inspired your husband's story. So actually, thank you very much all your effort so far. My first question will be, there has been an initiative in Europe named Agora, for me, it's really amazing. I don't know if how it will continue. As a member of MDA, is there going to be any initiative in the US as well? If you don't have any knowledge, I can put it in chat, and all our European friends here.
What is this initiative? Sorry.
Agora. I will write it in the chat, and I believe that there should be more initiatives like this in the US as well. And also, as a scientist, I would like to get your opinion about it. What have you heard about Mayo AAVs? Because I believe that it's going to be opening big door for all kinds of dystrophies, and I'm just wondering your thoughts about it.
Yeah, there are many different forms of those myotropic AAVs now, and many different companies are even coming up with their own ones. Definitely, if my husband were to get treated with AAV, I think that for an adult, it's not safe to use the first generation AAV because it's just so inefficient at getting to the muscle that you need such high amounts. And those high amounts equates to toxicity and safety issues. So if it weren't me, I think that I would wait for the Mayo AAV to be tested and to have ample safety data. But yeah, that's definitely it represents the next generation of AAV vectors that are, but who knows, they may have their own safety concerns. They have not been tried in humans. No technology is perfect, but it's definitely, it's very promising. But yeah, a lot of testing needs to be done first.
Okay, thank you.
Can you explain to me a little bit about this Agora and what it is?
I just wrote it in the chat.
Yeah.
I just put a link. Actually, there's a kind of a consortium in Europe. There have been some universities, and I'm pretty sure that there are people here having more knowledge than me. So, but you can also check it out through the website. So
I think
for me,
Alexandra knows more, and he wants to explain a little bit about Agora, right, Alexandra?
Yes. So thanks for the question, Onur. So first, answering your question about similar initiatives in the US, there is currently a huge consortium, which is not only US, called Gene Therapy Bespoke Consortium. It has been initiated by the NIH in the US. It includes most of the main developer of gene therapy, both private and public. It also implicates the regulatory agencies to take into account all the regulatory issues. And it's mainly American, as I said, but for example, Geneton, our laboratory, is part of the American Gene Therapy Bespoke Consortium. In parallel, we are pushing so that similar initiatives are organized in Europe. So as you mentioned, the first initiative is Agora, which is a consortium of research lab, mainly developing gene therapy treatment. And as you may have seen, there's a current call for project by EHI. So EHI in Europe, it's called Innovative Health Initiatives. It's usually a co-funded call between the pharmaceutical company and the European Commission. So usually the pharmaceutical company will identify a topic of interest. They will propose to support the topic by providing in-kind resources. They will evaluate the value of these in-kind resources. And for each euro provided in-kind by the pharmaceutical company, there will be €1 provided by the European Commission in cash. And so this call opened just 2 weeks ago. It will be funded with 26 million euro, so 13 million in kind coming from pharmaceutical company, 13 million in cash coming from the European Commission. And I cannot guess who will be or what will be the consortium which will be selected to tackle this issue and organize a European consortium on gene therapy. Without sharing confidential information, I can just tell you that Geneton is part of one of these potential consortium answering the call, and that looking at the other member in the call or in the consortium, they have good chances to be selected. So you may hear about a European consortium funded by EHI in a few weeks, months from now. But clearly very similar initiatives called the Gene Therapy Bespoke Consortium in the US. And fortunately, this consortium are not, US one side, European on the other side, but people are working together.
That sounds exciting.
It's needed. Collaboration is always needed.
Definitely, definitely.
Thank you. If there are any more questions, please feel free to ask them. If not, Arabella, I think we can move on.
Sorry, there is one question in the chat. Have you
Right.
ever done some research about DMD patients and their behavior, how dystrophin cause similar behavior like autism, ADHD, OCD?
Actually, yeah, one of the grants that we awarded this year is to look at the function of dystrophin in the brain and the consequences of missing that in specific parts of the brain. And at the conference, I believe, we have a session on DMD that does not focus on the muscles, actually, which is different than normal. So the function of dystrophin in other parts, in all the other parts of the body, the brain, the bone, and all other organs, and the consequences of missing them. So the non-muscle symptoms of DMD. So yeah. But yes, there is a high comorbidity between, like, if you have DMD and autism, and it's because the brain expresses a specific isoform of dystrophin, and people that hasn't been researched a lot, but it's definitely there's a link there, and we don't yet know why some people are more prone to getting autism or ADHD than others in terms of the DMD patients, but there is definitely comorbidity.